I want to tell you about the moment a man cut $35,000 from my salary, looked me in the eye, and smiled. It was not a grand gesture, and it was not the sort of display that fills a room with noise. It was small, controlled, the kind of expression that silently communicates that one person holds all the leverage, and both parties in the room are fully aware of it. His name was Grant Montgomery. He was the chief executive officer of Matrix Logistics Systems, the company I had dedicated 14 years of my life to supporting. Grant was 43 years old, always dressed in a jacket that fit with tailored precision and maintained a haircut that cost more than most people would spend on a monthly car payment. He possessed a ready explanation for everything and harbored doubt about nothing. Whenever he stepped into a space, he made sure everyone understood he was the most significant presence in it. I was 58 years old. My name is Lawrence Fowler, and on a Tuesday morning in April, I sat across from Grant in his corner office on the fourth floor and listened to him take apart my financial stability with the same casual energy most people use when ordering their midday meal. I had sat in that office many times before, discussing budgets and software developments, but this meeting had a completely different and more hostile tone. I remember the room with absolute clarity. A long glass window behind his modern desk looked out over the parking lot below, where the morning light sat flat and gray. His desk was almost completely bare, featuring only a closed laptop and a small silver pen that he kept rotating between his fingers while he spoke. He had folded his hands before starting like a man who had rehearsed his speech several times. He told me the decision was about restructuring. He used terms like performance realignment and corporate optimization. He explained that the company needed to make strategic adjustments to its compensation structure across senior roles to remain competitive in the logistics market. It sounded clean and highly professional, like something a public relations team would write for a press release. Then he stated the number. My base salary, which had been $150,000, was being reduced to $115,000, effective on the first of the coming month. $35,000 disappeared with a single phrase and the turn of a pen. It was a massive financial blow, one that would require immediate planning, yet I forced myself to remain completely still, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I sat with that statement for a long moment. I did not move. I did not allow my facial expression to change. I have worked in corporate environments long enough to understand that displaying pain in a room like that is equivalent to handing the other person a weapon. So I asked him one single question, asking if this decision was final. He nodded and said it was, and then he leaned back slightly in his leather chair, that small smile appearing on his face. He said he hoped I would understand the bigger picture of where the company was heading. It felt as though he believed he was doing me a favor by explaining the shape of the hole he had just carved out of my life. I nodded. In response, I thanked him for his time. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not request time to think or plead for reconsideration. Nor did I tell him what I actually thought of his corporate picture. I walked out calmly, chose the stairs instead of the elevator, and returned to my desk. What Grant Montgomery did not know and could not have known was that in the inside pocket of the jacket I was wearing that morning sat a folded document. It was a signed offer letter from Zenith Software Solutions, a direct competitor of Matrix Logistics Systems. That letter offered me a base salary of $198,000 per year. It included a clear performance bonus structure, equity participation, and comprehensive medical benefits. I had signed that letter 6 days earlier on a Thursday night, sitting at my own kitchen table. So, while Grant Montgomery sat in his corner office, believing he had just put an aging employee in his place, the truth was already decided. The door was already open, and I had already stepped through it. All that remained was the paperwork. He cut my salary by $35,000 and smiled, having absolutely no idea. That moment is where this story truly begins. Not in his office, not with his smile, and not with his polished words about restructuring. It begins with a man who had spent 14 years making himself indispensable to a company, who had watched that company slowly stop seeing him, who had quietly built a path to the outside, and who sat in silence while his supervisor unknowingly handed him the cleanest exit he could have ever requested. My name is Lawrence Fowler, and this is how the entire system fell apart because they forgot to look at what was holding it up. I am not the kind of man who is easy to notice. I do not walk into rooms with the presence of Grant Montgomery. I do not lead with volume or performance. I lead with work. I grew up in a working-class family in Ohio. My father worked in manufacturing for 32 years, and my mother managed every dollar that came through our household. They taught me the value of integrity and diligence, lessons that guided me throughout my entire professional career. I learned early that the people who keep things running are rarely the ones standing at the front getting the applause. They are in the back, ensuring the structure does not collapse. My work at Matrix Logistics Systems was focused entirely on systems integration, which is the highly specialized process of connecting different logistics platforms so that critical business information moves between them without error. It sounds like a simple matter when described in a high-level corporate meeting, but in reality it is incredibly complex. When integrations fail, businesses lose tracking data, lose revenue, and lose client trust. When they work perfectly, nobody notices anything at all, which is exactly how it should be. I joined Matrix when I was 44 years old, 14 years ago. The company builds and sells integration software to mid-size freight and distribution businesses that move physical goods across the country. These are not glamorous tech companies, but they are essential businesses running on real databases. Over 14 years, I became the only person who understood how every major client system connected to ours. I knew which clients ran older database structures that required custom translations, and I knew the undocumented workarounds we had built years ago to keep them running. I was the institutional memory of the integration division, the one who solved problems before they became crises. To paint a clearer picture, systems integration at this level means writing custom communication layers that sit between incompatible database architectures. A trucking firm might be running a database system from the late 90s, while a modern distributor uses a cloud-based platform. My role was to write the custom scripts that translate the data fields in real time, ensuring that a shipment of medical supplies or machine parts is not delayed due to a database syntax error. I took pride in this work, knowing that a single misplaced character could halt supply chains and disrupt entire operations. Over my 14 years at the company, I built over 40 of these custom integrations. Each one was tailored to the unique operational quirks of our clients. Outside of the office, my salary supported my family. My wife Sylvia worked part-time following a major health issue that required surgery. We were still rebuilding our finances and paying off medical bills. Our daughter Diana was in her second year at a university, and her tuition and housing were our responsibility. We also had a mortgage on our home with 6 years of payments remaining. When Grant Montgomery cut my salary by $35,000, he was not just adjusting a spreadsheet. He was removing the financial buffer that allowed my family to sleep at night. He did it with a smile, not caring what those numbers represented. This was not a matter of pride. It was about a mortgage, a daughter's education, and a wife recovering her strength. It was about the real cost of a chief executive officer's disregard. To understand why Grant's decision backfired so spectacularly, you have to understand what Matrix looked like before his arrival. The company was founded by Gerald Albright, a practical man who started Matrix in a small office with one client and grew it steadily. By the time I joined, Gerald had grown it to 200 employees and a stable client list. Gerald was not flashy, he was direct and fair, and he trusted the technicians who proved their worth over years of service. He did not care about corporate buzzwords. He cared about client satisfaction and keeping the systems running. Gerald retired 10 years ago, gradually selling his equity to the board. His departure left a vacuum that the board eventually filled with Grant Montgomery. Grant arrived with credentials that impressed the board, including a business degree from a top school and experience at 2 software companies. He was young, articulate, and obsessed with efficiency, modernization, and reducing operating costs. Within 2 months, Grant made his priorities clear: stating he wanted a leaner organization. He began surrounding himself with young managers who had business backgrounds but lacked technical experience. The one who rose fastest was Nolan Barlow. Nolan joined Matrix 10 months before my salary cut. He was 36 years old and possessed almost no experience with complex systems. Yet, within 4 months, Grant appointed Nolan to lead our integration modernization. Within 6 months, Nolan became my supervisor. A man who had been with the company for less than a year, who had never managed an integration, was now my boss. I did my job and answered his questions. But I noticed when Nolan presented a modernization report to Grant that was copied directly from documentation I had written with my name removed. I was being quietly erased by people who did not understand the systems they managed, and I knew their lack of knowledge would catch up with them. I was not looking for a new role when Miriam Holt reached out to me on a professional networking site on a Wednesday afternoon. Miriam had worked at Matrix for 3 years before leaving 2 years prior, and she was sharp and direct. She was now heading talent acquisition at Zenith Software Solutions, and she wanted to know if I had 30 minutes to talk. Zenith was a direct competitor of Matrix, and they had recently secured significant capital to expand their enterprise integration division. They did not need managers who talked about systems. They needed engineers who had built them. My technical interviews with Zenith lasted 3 weeks, covering database failures, custom application programming interfaces, and legacy system compatibility. I answered every question with the depth of my 14 years of experience, demonstrating my complete command over our industry's technology, and the written offer for $198,000 arrived shortly after. I signed it at my kitchen table, planning to give Matrix 3 weeks of notice while organizing my documentation. Miriam explained that Zenith's leadership had watched Matrix's recent shift toward management-heavy teams with growing interest. They saw an opportunity to capture Matrix's market share by offering superior technical support and direct developer access to clients. She told me that Zenith's leadership team believed the key to winning in the logistics space was not having the best-dressed sales representatives, but having the most robust and reliable integration software. That philosophy resonated with me immediately. During the 3 weeks of interviews, I spoke with senior architects at Zenith who asked deep questions about low-level system design. They wanted to know how I would handle a sudden database lockup during a high-volume shipping window, or how I would resolve character encoding issues between legacy mainframes and modern application programming interfaces. It was a refreshing change from the empty corporate buzzwords I had been hearing from Grant and Nolan. At Zenith, they cared about the actual architecture, not just the financial presentations. But before I could resign, Grant Montgomery called me in and cut my salary, presenting me with a document he called a proprietary rights assignment. Matrix had been using an integration engine called the Fowler Gateway, a software middleware tool I had written in my spare time before joining the company. Under my original employment contract with Gerald Albright, I retained the copyright to the Fowler Gateway, licensing it to Matrix under a non-exclusive agreement. Grant wanted me to sign a document transferring all intellectual property rights of the Fowler Gateway to Matrix for zero compensation. When I refused, Grant smiled and told me that my refusal would affect my future at the company, leading directly to the salary cut. What I did not discover until later was that Grant, desperate to show the board that Matrix owned the proprietary core of their client systems to justify Nolan's modernization budget, forged my signature on that assignment document. He was so confident in his authority that he assumed I would never check the corporate archives or question his actions. The Fowler Gateway was a proprietary piece of software I had spent nearly 2 years designing and coding long before I ever walked through the doors of Matrix. It was a modular integration framework that allowed different systems to exchange information at high speeds using a custom caching mechanism I had developed. When I was hired, Gerald Albright recognized the value of this software and agreed that the intellectual property rights would remain entirely mine. We signed a licensing agreement that permitted Matrix to use the Fowler Gateway in their client systems in exchange for a separate licensing fee and the understanding that I retained complete ownership of the code. Grant's attempt to force me to sign away these rights was not just a minor corporate dispute. It was a hostile takeover of my personal intellectual property. That forgery would become the legal weapon that destroyed Grant's plan. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forging a signature on a contract is a criminal offense, rendering it void ab initio. Because the assignment was void, Matrix's use of the Fowler Gateway in their systems constituted federal copyright infringement under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. I walked back to my desk with the signed Zenith offer in my pocket, knowing Grant had crossed a dangerous legal line. I spent the day organizing my personal files, ensuring my exit would be handled by my attorney. As I sat at my desk, I realized the implications of what Grant had done. By forging my signature, he had attempted to steal my work to satisfy his ego. But he had also handed me the perfect legal recourse. My attorney confirmed we had a clear case of copyright infringement. We decided to hold our position until my resignation was complete. I would serve my 3 weeks of notice, allowing Matrix to believe they had pressured me while we prepared the legal documents. The trap was set, and Grant had walked right into it, completely unaware that his greed had placed his company in jeopardy. I wrote my resignation letter on Monday morning, keeping the text concise and professional. I confirmed my last day would be 3 weeks from that date, offering no explanation and making no mention of the salary reduction. I sent the email to Human Resources and copied Grant Montgomery. Grant did not respond for 4 hours. When he finally approached my workspace, he stood there looking unsettled and remarked that he had not seen this coming. I simply told him I understood, refusing to engage in the debate he wanted. Over the next 3 weeks, the office atmosphere shifted. The technicians on my team, including Simon, who had worked with me for 6 years, sensed that something was wrong. Nolan Barlow began appearing at my desk multiple times a day with urgent questions. He asked about database access, credential rotations, and client configurations. In those 15 days, Nolan came to my desk 14 times, his confidence replaced by quiet desperation. I printed 3 physical copies of the resignation letter and signed each one in blue ink. I kept 1 copy for my own personal records, placed one in a sealed envelope on Grant's empty desk, and handed the 3rd copy directly to the Human Resources Director. The atmosphere in the office during those 3 weeks was thick with tension. Simon, who had worked in the cubicle next to mine for 6 years and had helped me resolve countless system issues, knew that my departure meant the end of an era. He asked me quietly if the company had tried to make me a counteroffer, and I told him the truth. They had only tried to take what was mine. Nolan Barlow's visits to my desk became increasingly frantic. He would stand at the edge of my workspace, nervously tapping his pen against his folder, and ask questions that showed he had no understanding of the basic files he was supposed to manage. He asked how the servers handled database load balancing, how the application programming interface keys were rotated, and where the master configuration files were stored. He was trying to absorb 14 years of knowledge in 15 days, and it was clear to both of us that it was impossible. The cracks in the system appeared quickly. 5 days after my resignation, the integration for Pinecrest Transport, our top revenue client, failed. The issue was connected to a legacy database shift that disrupted the custom compatibility patch I had written. Nolan could not resolve it, and the IT department was helpless. When they called me, I explained the solution over the phone in 20 minutes, but the client was furious that a critical system had stalled. Next, the IT department tried to migrate the database credentials for our client onboarding pipeline away from my administrator account. I had built the pipeline to run through a specific sequence. The IT team spent 5 days trying to reverse engineer it, realizing that if they made one mistake, the entire pipeline would lock up. They finally had to ask me for the sequence document, which I provided. Meanwhile, an internal compliance audit began examining our active client contracts, highlighting the non-standard terms I had negotiated. The failure of the Pinecrest Transport integration was a direct result of Nolan's attempt to update the database configuration without understanding the custom patch. He had run an automated migration script that wiped out the custom translation rules I had written, causing their inventory system to mismatch with our shipping logs. Within an hour of the update, Pinecrest's distribution centers in 3 states were unable to print shipping labels, and trucks were sitting idle at the docks. The panicking operations director at Pinecrest called Nolan, who tried to blame a network latency issue. When they finally escalated the call to me, I logged in, located the backup file of the custom patch, and restored the translation rules, resolving the issue in 20 minutes. But the damage to Matrix's reputation was already done. The Pinecrest team knew that Nolan had no idea how to fix his own system, and they knew that I was the only reason their operations had resumed. During my final week, Grant Montgomery called me into his office once more. He looked tired, the confident smile entirely absent. He asked if there was any amount of money that would convince me to stay. I told him my decision was final, and I walked out. On my last Friday, I submitted my completed handoff documentation, packed my coffee mug, my family photo, and my notebooks, and said goodbye to Simon and the technicians. I sat in my driveway for 5 minutes when I got home, feeling the weight of 14 years lift from my shoulders. When I walked inside, I sat at the kitchen table and told Sylvia everything, including the salary cut. She sat quietly for a moment, then placed her hand over mine and wept. It was a release of years of tension, the relief of knowing that we were finally free from the constant pressure of a company that did not value what I brought to the table. As the door of Matrix closed behind me for the last time, I felt a profound sense of closure. The years of quiet dedication, the long nights spent fixing database errors, and the frustration of being managed by people who did not understand the technology were all in the past. I knew the coming weeks would be chaotic for Grant and Nolan as they struggled to maintain the systems without my guidance. But my focus was now on the future. I was joining Zenith Software Solutions, a company that valued my expertise and was willing to pay me what I was worth. I had protected my family, secured my daughter's education, and stood up for my rights. The legal battle was about to begin, but I was entering it from a position of strength supported by my family and a clear conscience. The aftermath began 3 weeks after my departure. My attorney sent a formal cease and desist letter to Matrix Logistics Systems, accompanied by proof of the forged signature on the proprietary rights assignment. The letter cited California Penal Code Section 470, declaring the assignment void, and demanded that Matrix immediately cease all use of the Fowler Gateway, referencing our rights under Title 17. United States Code, Section 106. When the board of directors received the letter, they panicked. The legal department confirmed that if the document was forged, Matrix was facing massive copyright infringement liability. Grant Montgomery was suspended immediately, pending an internal investigation, because Matrix could not legally run the Fowler Gateway without my consent. They had to halt several core system integrations, which caused Pinecrest transport systems to fail once again. My attorney's letter was accompanied by a forensic analysis showing clear indicators of forgery. The board of directors, consisting of 7 members, called an emergency meeting. They realized Grant's actions had exposed Matrix to millions in damages under federal copyright law, and that their top client accounts ran on unlicensed software. Grant's suspension was announced on Monday, and the legal department began reviewing his contracts. Because they were prohibited from using the Fowler Gateway, they disabled the integrations for their top accounts, halting the automated data sync for Pinecrest Transport and 4 other major distributors. Pinecrest Transport did not wait. Their operations director contacted Matrix and demanded that they either resolve the legal dispute or face a lawsuit for breach of contract. Pinecrest also reached out to me directly, asking if I would return as an independent consultant at a rate of $300 per hour to stabilize their systems. I agreed, signing a consulting contract that Matrix had to fund. Within a month, Nolan Barlow stepped down from his management position and the board began restructuring the integration department. Grant Montgomery was officially terminated, and the company is currently negotiating a settlement with my legal counsel to avoid a public federal copyright lawsuit. I did not watch this collapse with anger or joy. I was busy with my new role at Zenith Software Solutions, where my salary of $198,000 is secure. The consulting contract I signed with Matrix was structured with a minimum guarantee of 40 hours per week at $300 per hour, paid in advance. This meant Matrix was paying me $12,000 a week just to remain on call. Nolan Barlow's departure was quiet. He was allowed to resign to avoid being fired. The settlement negotiations are moving toward an agreement that includes a substantial licensing fee for their past unauthorized use of my software. Grant's career is effectively over, as the board is preparing to turn the evidence of forgery over to the district attorney. It has been 5 months since I walked out. I spent over a decade making myself indispensable but invisible. Indispensable means they need your work. Visible means they see your value. Grant Montgomery cut my salary, believing I had no options, but he only exposed his own vulnerability. Today, Diana's tuition is paid, our mortgage is secure, and Sylvia is healthy. I work where my contributions are recognized. I walked away from that cold office and found my value, and no corporate smile can take that away again. Looking back, I realized the true victory was reclaiming my agency. In the corporate world, it is easy to become a cog and accept mistreatment due to fear of change. But when I stood up to Grant and invoked the law, I reminded myself that my skills belonged to me. We are often taught that loyalty is its own reward, but the modern corporate environment is run by metrics and managed by people who look at employees as line items. When Grant Montgomery cut $35,000 from my pay, he was not looking at the man who had kept their systems running for 14 years. He was only looking at a spreadsheet, not realizing that the systems he thought he owned were built on my expertise. I chose to take my intellect with me. My transition to Zenith has been a revelation. The management team consists of former engineers who understand the technical challenges of systems integration. When I propose an upgrade, they listen and provide the resources. My work is recognized as a core driver of the company's success. I am no longer invisible, and my compensation reflects that. Sylvia has noticed the difference too. The quiet stress I carried home has evaporated, replaced by satisfaction and purpose. As for Matrix Logistics Systems, their attempt to bypass the legal restrictions on the Fowler Gateway failed. Their team spent months trying to build a replacement, but they lacked the domain knowledge to handle legacy systems. One by one, their major accounts experienced data synchronization errors, leading to delayed deliveries. Several of their largest partners transitioned to Zenith Software Solutions. In his attempt to save $35,000, Grant ended up costing his company millions in lost revenue and legal fees. It is a reminder that the foundation of any technology company is not its leadership, but the technical talent that builds its systems. I am proud that I stood up for my work, and I am grateful for the new path it opened.